Good afternoon. It is Monday, June 17th, 2013. This is Jason Horak reporting on the ongoing adventures of the Dodge Daytona electric vehicle. As you may notice, the car is back in the garage and it's up on the jack stands again. Now, why would that be? Well, we had a little issue, mechanical issue, go figure, with the clutch. This happened about 2 weeks ago. Basically, as I was tooling along, I noticed that I was having trouble shifting, and pushing in the clutch no longer had any impact on how easy it was to shift. I was still able to shift the car when it was not moving at all, so if I came to a complete stop, I could put it in any gear I like, but if I am moving along at any speed, it would not shift. This tells me that the pressure plate was not releasing the pressure on the clutch and not letting me shift. So that's great. My theory is that the little fingers on the pressure plate are either broken or not being pushed by the throwout bearing. And so whether the throwout bearing broke or fell off, or the little fingers that push it down on the motor or on the transmission side of things, the clutch fingers broke, I don't know. Either way, the only way to fix it is, of course, to drop the transmission and the motor and all that good stuff. So that's what we've got going on here today. And why it's up on the jack stands is because, of course, there's a problem up in there somewhere. Now, the irony is that the car has actually been working just fine. Because it's an electric vehicle, I can still accelerate just like normal. I can go, I can put it in fourth gear and go from 0 to about 90 miles an hour in a single gear. It doesn't accelerate terribly quickly in fourth gear, but, it gets me going fast enough for highway driving and so forth, so that's just fine. When I'm just bombing around town, I'll put it in third, usually, and that gets me going reasonably quickly. Basically with other traffic and stuff, it's about the same. It's not going to spin the tires in third gear too much, or too often, but I'm able to still get around just fine, even though my clutch doesn't work. So it's kind of, I don't know, it's one of those weird little side benefits of an electric car that people don't think about, but, if a gas car, if the clutch goes, you're done. You're not going to be moving the vehicle at all. If you weren't able to relieve the pressure on the clutch, it would just continuously stall. You might be able to get it started in neutral, but as soon as you tried to jam it into a gear, you'd probably stall it or shred your transmission or something horrible. But anyway, so the plan is I'm going to be dropping this thing out, and what I'm going to do this time is pull the wheels, pull the drive shafts, and actually drop the transmission and the motor as one unit. And the advantage to doing it that way is, for one, it's more like the original gas engine, how they would take it out for service and so forth. They wouldn't just drop the engine out, they'd take the whole thing. And this way I can more easily get at all the bolts and get things taken apart and put back together and figure out what the heck's going on with the clutch. While I'm at it, I'm probably going to actually swap transmissions. I have another one in the back of the garage there that is from the first electric car, and that's a little bit stronger transmission. This one's an A520 that's in the car right now, and the one that I have is an A555, which was, I believe, the strongest transmission that they made for these cars back in the late 80s. That particular transmission they made in order to handle the higher horsepower of the Turbo 2 intercooled motor, which I think was 174 horsepower or something like that. And so it should be just a little more stout for the abuse that it's going to take from my little electric motor here. So that'll be a good upgrade, I think. And also, this 520 transmission that's in here does have an issue where shifting into fifth gear is kind of makes sort of a grinding noise, and it's kind of like the synchromeshes are gone or something. So it's had a long-standing issue that wasn't a big enough problem for me to want to swap the whole transmission, but I figured since I got to take the whole thing out anyway to fix this clutch problem, I might as well do the transmission at the same time. So anyway, I'm going to go ahead and let you listen to what this thing sounds like. Again, it's up on the jack stands at the moment, so we can put it into different gears and so forth. Please ignore the annoying hissing in the background. That's my new DC to DC converters that just do that. But anyway, so that is in, let us double check, yes, that's actually in neutral at the moment. And so the noise that it makes sounds a little bit, I don't know, it's a little loud, I think, for neutral. And there's like grinding, crunchy noises. So there's definitely something wrong in the clutch and transmission and stuff. So you know, again, it does drive at the moment. It's just needs to be taken out, and we'll find out what's really going on. So here's the transmission from this side, and that's the filler or the drain plug. Let's see, right here. This is to put in or take out the oil into the transmission is right there, which is kind of a weird spot for it, but that's the way it works. And yeah, so anyway, I just figured I'd take a little quick run around here to show you what's going on, and before I get everything all tore apart. And we're about to do that now. Be back in a bit. Alrighty then, so step one in removing the transmission from the Daytona here is we have to take off both front wheels. So I'm going to go ahead and get to that, and we'll get those wheels off, and then we'll be right back. Okay, now with the tires removed, we can see the brake rotor here, and how the mechanism works that holds it onto the drive shaft is it's got this little pin that prevents this cap from coming out, and then underneath that cap is a nut. So we've got to loosen or take that pin out, take that cap off, and then take the nut off. So I'll show you on the other side where I've already got the cap off and the nut is exposed. And now this is a fairly enormous nut, so I had to go out and buy a special, what size is this actually? I don't know, it's from Napa, and it's 1 1/4 inch socket. So this is a 1/2 inch driver on a breaker bar, and so I basically got to turn this to loosen it. Now the trick is everything moves. So I might have to go get a friend to like hold the brake on while I'm doing this so that I can actually get this loosened up. That ought to be fun. So we'll go take care of that, and I'll be right back. Okay, well now we have this nut loosened up, we can take that right off, and underneath we see we have a spacer ring, or a washer, that rides against the inside of this. And so at this point, technically, this is the end of the drive shaft, which goes through the rotor, and then you can see it going up there to the transmission. Pretty straightforward. Unfortunately, we can't get it out because it's sandwiched in between those two pieces. So what I've done in the past, which is probably not the recommended method, but this is kind of what I've figured out just by looking at it. It's attached in 3 places. So we've got the 2 bolts here, we have the steering assembly here, and then underneath it kind of rests on this arm that goes over here to the car. And so there's like motor mounts on this arm to make it so it can bounce, and then the rest of it is connected. So what I've done in the past is I've actually just undone these 2 bolts, and it allows this whole mechanism to kind of pivot and swing down just a little bit while it's still attached to the brake caliper, because taking off the brake caliper is kind of a major ordeal. You need special equipment, you have to bleed the brakes, it's a whole process. But to get the drive shaft out, I found that I've been able to do it simply by, without as much effort, just by taking out these 2 bolts and then kind of swinging this whole assembly out and away enough to get the drive shaft out. Because basically the drive shaft has to go back in about yay far in order to clear, and then I can take it out. So anyway, that's what I'm going to do, and it's one of those things that's really hard to photograph in progress because my hands will be covered entirely in grease and I'll be probably cussing up a storm, so as I struggle with this thing. But after I get it apart a little bit here, we'll take another little video clip and we'll go from there. Be back in a bit. Okay, now that those bolts are out, we can see that this whole assembly kind of moves around a bit, and in fact we can kind of move the drive shaft in and out just a little bit at this point. So we're definitely, making progress. In order to get this whole assembly out of this little hole, it's basically got a pin on the bottom, and it's held in by this bolt right here that keeps it on the pin from slipping up. So what we're going to do is take that little bolt out, and that should allow this whole assembly to lift and be a lot easier to deal with. It'll only be attached by the by the steering piece here, and so we have to be very gentle. It'll also be, of course, attached by the brake hoses. So the idea is just to lift it a little bit to get the drive shaft out, and then it can be put back on its little pin, and it'll be supported by the pin while it's just kind of chilling out here, waiting for the drive shaft to be put back in. So anyway, I'm going to go ahead and take that bolt out. Again, this little guy right here to get the assembly off that pin, and we'll be right back. Okay, with a somewhat Herculean effort and a lot of colorful metaphors, I finally got this wheel assembly disconnected and was able to free the drive shaft. So there's the drive shaft there. And as you can see, I've got the assembly hanging by the original strut springs, so it's still supported and chilling out there without putting a lot of stress on either the brake hose or the steering assembly there. So anyway, so there we go. So the problem that I had was, and this is kind of attached in 3 main points. You got these 2 bolts here that go into the strut to suspend the thing, and then on the bottom we have this big arm, this lower control arm as they call it, and it has a pin on it that the wheel pivot, or this assembly pivots on. In that pin, you can see that there's kind of a little divot out of the back. Well, what that is that the pin goes up through, I'm not sure if I'm going to get a good shot of this, it goes up through the assembly here, so the pin goes up through the bottom, and then in this end is where the bolt goes that holds it all together, and that bolt, because of this divot, prevents the thing from popping out. So anyway, and that's all well and good. The trouble in my case was that the bolt, when it came out, it hit this here, the brake caliper assembly. So when the bolt came out, it couldn't like release all the way. So I had to take the whole brake caliper, just disconnect it and kind of slide it out of the way so that I could get that stinking bolt out. I'm sure they did that on purpose. Maybe so that if the nut ever fell off the bolt, it would not actually fall out all the way. But boy, it sure is a pain in the butt when you're trying to take it apart like this. So anyway, we now have the drive shaft has been freed, and as you can see, I managed to damage the boot. So this is the little rubber boot that keeps all the lubricant. There's some kind of grease inside the bearings, inside the drive shaft, that allows it to, flex and all that good stuff. But I managed to cut the boot slightly, and thus some of the grease is leaking out. And that means that contaminants and things will get in there and eventually cause the bearing to fail, much like it did at the first EVCON. When I lost this part broke at EVCON, probably for the same reason, that it had gotten damaged. In that case, it was the original drive shaft that I didn't actually remove from the car, but anyway, so I'm probably gonna have to replace the whole stinking drive shaft because of this. These boots are pretty cheap. I could get the new rubber booty thing, but then I'd have to disassemble this whole unit and then put it back together without like screwing it up and breaking things. It's probably better for me to buy a new, $60 drive shaft and call it good. I also might have one in the shed from previous projects and other Daytonas. So that's where it goes up into the transmission up there. And so I'm going to go ahead and pull this out, and when I do, all the oil is going to leak out, and there we go, better shot. So when I pull that out, all the oil, the transmission oil, is going to come pouring out because it's that's how you drain it in this particular transmission. There's not a drain plug. It's just when you pull the drive shaft out, it'll just pour out. So anyway, we're going to get that drive shaft pulled out and the oil drained, and I'll be back in a bit. Okay, the drive shaft has been removed, and it basically just slid right out. It's not a big deal. And all of the oil has been drained, at least as much as would come from this end of the transmission, with the car more or less level up on the jack stands. So this is the passenger side of the transmission, and that's where the drive shaft just came out of. As we can see in there, it's all kind of shiny, and has been well lubricated. And on the left hand side, that is the speedometer sensor. So that's giving us our speed of how fast the drive shaft is spinning, is basically how it tracks how fast the car is going. So anyway, it's an electronic speedometer sensor. You can see the little wires come out of there, and in the back of the frame there we can actually see the shifter cables. So those come right from the shifter in the car to the transmission up on top, and that's how it actuates the mechanism inside the transmission to shift gears. So anyway, what we're going to do now is go over to the other side of the car and repeat the same process over there, and having learned a little bit, hopefully it'll be easier. Be right back. Okay, with the passenger side drive shaft out, we now need to move our attention over to the driver's side. So this is the driver's side shaft is much shorter, just goes right into the transmission right there. This is the bottom of the transmission, and basically what I've learned from my hard-won experience on the other side is the proper order to do this to make this less painful. On the other side, I had taken these bolts out first, and then you know, was trying to get this whole thing off, and it just was a big pain in the neck. So this time, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take out this bolt here, which goes on that pin, just like the other side, and it is the steering knuckle. So this bolt will come out and it'll hit against this brake caliper. So these two bolts have to come out, here and here, and then the caliper can kind of just be moved just a little bit up so that that bolt can slide out, and you know, we can make that happen. So procedure now is this one, then these two, get this out of the way, get this bolt out, put this back, screw these back in, then pull out those two bolts and suspend the thing from the strap. So anyway, that's my plan. We're going to go ahead and implement that now and see how well it works. And just while I'm down here, I wanted to point out this is the clutch arm. So basically what happens is there's a cable right there. It's kind of hard to see, but that's the clutch cable, and so it pulls this arm up and just, you know, kind of like a lever, moves that up. And what this does is it moves what they call the clutch fork, which are two little pieces of metal in and out. And what that does is moves the pressure, it's the throwout bearing, presses against the pressure plate, those little tiny fingers on the pressure plate, and that's what releases the clutch, and it releases the pressure on the clutch so that then the clutch is allowed to slip. So the whole problem is, the whole reason why we're doing all this effort is because I can move this thing by hand. I can push it up and without pressing on the pedal, which means that there's really no resistance in there. It's not hitting against something. I don't know if that means that the throwout bearing has fallen off, or maybe those little clutch fork fingers have broken, or maybe the fingers on the pressure plate. Who knows? So I have to take this all apart to find out, and that's why we're doing this. So anyway, I'll get this all disassembled and get this drive shaft out, and we'll be right back. Okay, well, this drive shaft came up with notably less effort and cussing than the previous one. And so again, we got it held by our straps, kind of suspended in midair there, off of the steering knuckle and lower control arm. So now we can start to see the actual, let's get the camera in here so you can see that's the transmission and where the drive shaft just came out of. So no oil came out on this side. It's prepared just in case, but it did not. And so there we are. So now the transmission is free. This means that we can now remove it by extracting each of its motor mounts. So there's one here in the front. It's the main one that holds the motor and the transmission up. Then there's another one up on top that's like nearly impossible to see. We're actually seeing the back of it here. Let's see if I can get the light a little bit better. It's hard. There's not a lot of room in here. So anyway, those bolts there are the transmission bolts for the transmission side motor mount that is up above us there. There's an access hole right here that you can take off that cover and get at the bolt to remove that and just drop the transmission without taking out those 3 bolts. I'm not sure which one is going to be an easier solution. But also, back in here, which is nearly impossible to see, so this is the shift linkage. So that would be the, when you go forward and back on the shifter, as well as left and right, that's what moves that little arm. So all those have to be unhooked, obviously, before the transmission can be dropped out of the car. And but what's really hard to see, and I don't know how I'm going to even get to it, is back in there somewhere, there is a shock absorber. We might be able to see it better from the other side, but it's just a little tiny shock absorber that attaches the transmission in the back to the frame of the car. So I gotta get that all unhooked, and obviously the transmission has to be supported by something, so I'll be using my jack with the motorcycle plate, I guess, that goes up on top of the jack, and we'll go from there. So anyway, I'll be back once we've got that all rigged up and ready to do big business. Okay then, with the drive shafts removed, the next task is to actually drop the motor and the transmission. Specifically what we got here, you can see the top 3 bolts. There's kind of like 2 across the top and then 1 kind of on the side. That is the motor mount for the transmission, or the transmission mount, I suppose you could say. And that is actually suspended from this bolt here that was behind a little protective cover. So what we can do is actually remove either that 1 bolt or those 3 to remove the support from the transmission. Obviously we'll have to support the transmission underneath when we're doing this, otherwise it will be very difficult to remove the bolt or it will fall upon me. So that is the motor mount on this side. So this is on the driver's side. Now let's take a look underneath at the other ones. Okay, so it's very difficult to see where that one actually is with all this stuff in the way, but it's basically up right above this line for that side. The other side, actually, gives you this way a little better. So this is the front motor mount that hooks into both the transmission and the motor, and provides support from that point. In the back, you can see there's a shock absorber. Now that shock absorber is, I think, designed to absorb the shock from when you accelerate and the entire assembly twists slightly. And the final motor mount, of course, is on the motor side, and that's right up there. We've seen it before. It's what this big metal plate is attached to. So this is actually what supports the tail shaft side of the motor. And so those are the 4 points at which the entire drivetrain is attached to the car. So what I'm going to do is put a jack stand, or a jack actually, under here and strap it to the motor and support it, and that will allow me to undo all those bolts without having things fall down. Now, wiring wise, pretty simple. The positive lead and the negative lead on the motor have to be disconnected. This wire can stay because this is just connecting to bolts on the motor. Obviously my new temperature sensor will have to be disconnected, but that's just a plug. And then I'll have to undo the RPM gauge on that side, the RPM sensor, and make sure that all that can come apart. So I will get all these wires taken down apart and get the support under the motor, and we'll be right back. Alrighty then, so just to give a quick update, I have all of the cables unhooked, which of course was just the 2 cables there for the high voltage, the temperature sensor, and the speed sensor. On the other side of the world, which is the transmission side, we've got all of the shift linkage cables, the clutch cable, the speedometer wire, and the backup light wire have been disconnected. I believe that's everything. And then I have it supported on this motorcycle adapter for the lift, hopefully in the center of the weight, which is basically right where it joins the motor to the bell housing. I think it's going to be a little heavier on the left, but that's why it's strapped securely to this thing, so that even if the weight isn't perfect, it should still support it reasonably well. So we shall see how that all works. So just on this side, again, it's a really hard place to get into, but as you can see, I have the shift linkage cables disconnected. I'm just kind of chilling out there. And then on this side, we have the clutch cable disconnected, as well as up in there is where the backup light connection goes. So, anyway, here, as they say, goes nothing. We're going to go ahead and try unbolting stuff. I'm going to start with that bolt in the back on that shock absorber, get that thing free, and then we'll come along to probably the front mount, get that disconnected, and then I'll do the motor mount on the left hand side, and then finally the transmission mount on this side. So I guess we'll give it a try and see what happens. Hopefully I'll be back soon. Well, for better or worse, the motor is out, and as you can see, we have it sitting on the floor in the garage. So basically, we just have to pull the motor apart now as far as the bolts that connect it to the transmission, and then once we do that, we will be able to take a look at that clutch issue and find out what the heck is really going on. So anyway, I'm going to go ahead and get that taken care of. The lift method with the motorcycle unit there did not work at all. Because the motor wasn't balanced very well, it ended up kind of tipping over, and I was able to catch it and onto this piece of wood, so it didn't hurt the motor, but it did come down rather abruptly and actually sheared the metal pin in that motorcycle platform thing. So that's pretty much useless, and we'll have to come up with another plan for how to get this motor back up in here when we're ready to remount it up in the car. So anyway, we'll go ahead and get the motor pulled apart from the transmission and take a look at what's going on. Okay, now with the motor down and out of the car and now disassembled, separated from the transmission, we can kind of take a look at what's going on here. Now, if anyone ever was wondering, does he really drive this thing all winter long? Just take a look at the salt that is encrusted on this transmission. Look at that. But anyway, so the transmission, does work fine, other than that fifth gear problem. So I may have it rebuilt or something, because hey, I've always got another Daytona project. But this is that clutch fork that I was talking about. So when I move the lever, it pushes the throw-up bearing out. Now, this used to move very easily, and now it's not. So I'm not sure, whether it's just needs to be greased or what's going on. But it's also looking kind of sketchy. There's little flakes of metal in there. It looks like it's tore up a bit. Camera isn't really focusing very well, but anyway, so that's one issue. The next issue is, as you can see, there's a bunch of little metal filings down here that had fallen in the bottom of the bell housing, and so I'm not really sure what that's all about. However, on the clutch, as I spin this, of course there's somebody mowing the lawn behind me, so you probably can't hear, but it makes kind of a metallic clanking noise. So there's something flying around in there, and I'm guessing it's part of the actual clutch mechanism itself, like maybe one of the springs that I can kind of see in there or something that are shot. Which means I have to take off the pressure plate, which is always fun. Also, as I'm spinning this, you can see it's raining chunks of little metal filings down out of it. So there's definitely something chewed up in there. But the only way to really find out is to pull the pressure plate. So we'll go ahead and do that, and we'll see where we get. Fun, fun, fun. Well, Houston, I think we've figured out what the source of the problem was. This is my spec Stage 3 Plus clutch. Note the big chunk of badness that fell out of there. All tore up and actually threw a spring, and then that spring has been rubbing on the inside of the flywheel and just tearing that all to pieces. That's great. So that would be the rubbing. Look how it's like blown out. Like it's all mangled there and stuff. So apparently I put too much torque on the clutch for it to handle, I guess. I don't know. Yep, that would be the power of the electric motor right there. So interesting. So anyway, so the clutch is shot. And the throwout bearing is kind of crunchy and not really working so well, so we'll be ditching that as well and replacing that with a new one. I don't have another spec clutch, and at this point I'm not going to replace it with one. I do have a, what was it, a Sachs or Sachs? I forget how you pronounce it. That particular unit worked just fine. I may use the pressure plate from the spec just because this is probably a little hardier. Not that it really matters at this point, but yeah. So that, my friends, was the source of the problem and why I had to take my entire car apart. Yay! Funny thing is, the clutch actually held just fine, even being broken. It just didn't release, which was kind of a problem. But anyway, so what we're going to do is go find a different clutch and put that in here. And while I have the motor down and apart like this, I'm going to probably do a spin test on it just to make sure that there's no vibration or weird noises going on from the actual, from the motor itself without having anything else involved. I'll have to take off my little locking mechanism here that keeps this from spinning when I'm doing bolts, but yeah, so we'll get that wired up and I'll be right back. Okay, so I have the motor hooked up in this little temporary configuration where it's just kind of chilling here. It's attached to the soliton, and that's it. And then so I've got the soliton hooked up to my magic little data logger program, and so we can see what's going on. Obviously the temperature reading is inaccurate since the temperature sensor is not hooked up. Anyway, so these are the settings that we're currently running with. This is just what was in there from before. So what I'm going to do is use my ghetto cruise control just by taping this on a little bit once I get it up to speed. And that way I can actually take the camera down and listen to the motor at various points and so forth. So anyways, what we're going to do is just actuate this up a little bit. So we're giving it about 5 volts, 7 volts on the motor voltage, about 56 amps, about 8. So don't really care how fast it's going, I just want it to go a little bit while I'm measuring here. We'll see how long my whole electrical tape method holds. But yeah, so we're pulling between 4 and 7 volts, about 48 amps continuous. And obviously the RPM is not working because I don't have the sensor hooked up. But let's go ahead and listen. rev it just a little bit. And finally we'll stop it. Seems like it's less of a takeoff. So you can hear that there's kind of a little bit of a chirping noise. Not entirely sure what that is. It is coming from inside the motor. So anyway, that would be my test of the sound of what the motor makes when there's nothing attached to it. Might be that it's got dirt and crust in the bearings. I really don't know, but without having special equipment and bearing lube, I don't really know what else I could do. So I'm going to go ahead and get it all put back together with the pressure plate and clutch, and we'll try to fit it into the other transmission and see what we can do. Anyway, I'll be right back. So here we're taking a look at just these two transmissions. So again, the one on the left here is the original one that was in the car when I bought it, and I've been using it right along. This is the one that has the shifting into fifth issue with the sinker meshes, and this new issue with the throwout bearing. So again, this is an A520. I'm not sure if the camera is making that out or not, but it says new process gear, model 520, Syracuse, New York, from 5/31/1989. Get that there, but with the glare it's kind of hard to see. But anyway, the other one looks almost exactly identical. There's some little minor cosmetic differences, but otherwise, this is the A555. And actually this one has an A on it, the other one only said 520. I'm not sure if that makes a difference or not, but this one was 8/18/1988, and again, Syracuse, New York. I'm not sure if that'll make it out at all, but anyway, so that is the transmission that I'm going to put in here. This one I had bought from a guy online, I believe on the Turbo Dodge forums, if I recall correctly, and he kindly drove it down from Rochester and dropped it off here. So this particular transmission was the one that I had in the first electric vehicle, and I had done a conversion on that one from automatic to manual, and this was the transmission that I had in there. So anyway, I wanted to point out the whole throwout bearing mechanism thing. So this one, when you press the pedal or press the clutch, it raises this lever. That lever moves those two little shift forks, or clutch forks, and pushes the throwout bearing in and out. Pretty simple, right? Well, on this one, on the one that was in the car, I cannot move this thing very easily. It's like quite a force of effort to lift it up and down. So there's definitely something that's kind of binding, and it was having issues. So, but anyway, so this is the transmission that I'm putting back in the car, and hopefully it'll work a lot better than the previous one. And just taking a look here at the flywheel, you can see where that spring had just chewed out this big ring there, and this around the edge. Quite a bit of damage from that spring digging in, but I think the flywheel itself is still fine. The friction surface here is steel, and it looks fine. So anyway, so we're going to get this put back together, and we'll be back in a bit. So actually there was one other thing on the transmission. This old transmission that was on the original EV. The problem that I had with it was that it leaked transmission oil. I think I was using automatic transmission fluid at the time, or sinker mesh or something. But anyway, it kept leaking it all the time out of where the drive shafts go in. What I found was that these little rings here are actually replaceable. And so I bought a couple of replaceable rings, and I'll be putting those on when I put this new transmission in, so hopefully we won't have any more leakage. So anyway, just kind of wanted to mention that because it is kind of an issue. I guess these seals, the rubber gets wore out and so forth, and then it leaks oil. So hopefully no more little oil puddles underneath my electric car, because that was kind of embarrassing. Anyway, take care, and I'll be back in a bit. Okay, so after cleaning up the motor a little bit, I went through and sanded the surface that was all kind of chewed up from the spring on that old clutch disc. So it may not be perfectly in balance anymore, but it's probably pretty close, because all of the damage was in a nice circular fashion as the thing was spinning. So there were quite a bit of metal shavings that were inside there, and so I hooked up the old vacuum cleaner and sucked them out. So anyway, got all those. Oh, well, I just saw another one, so I'll have to hit it with a vacuum again. But basically, I was digging around in the shed, and I found this like new clutch disc. This is the Sachs, there we go, I'll say it right, the Sachs clutch disc. It's in pretty darn good shape. It was in the car for a very short amount of time before being replaced by the spec kit. The flywheel, or the pressure plate rather, is very nice and shiny. I don't know if this was actually in there at all, I can't remember, but either way, I'm going to use this setup. So because these actually came together as a kit, I'm assuming they're kind of balanced together and so forth. And rather than mixing and matching with the spec pressure plate, which may or may not have stronger holding force, at this point I just don't want to deal with it anymore. So we're going to put this one in, which is an inexpensive kit, but it was made as a stock OEM replacement for these particular vehicles. So anyway, I'm going to get that cleaned up a little bit more and then get that bolted on. I'll be right back. Alrighty then. So I got distracted this afternoon and then ended up taking off a couple of the pieces. As you can see, it's all nice and shiny now because I painted with a good old hammered black just a few of the pieces on the transmission. As well as got the transmission kind of cleaned up and generally ready to go in the car, since I was taking this opportunity. One other thing that happened today was I borrowed a friend's car and went out and bought me a new toy. And that is a Duralast motorcycle jack. So it was on sale for $89. So I picked up that bad boy in the hope that it is going to be able to support the weight of the motor and the transmission better than the little adapter kit I was using before. So it's a fairly substantial unit. It's kind of heavy in its own right, and it's got a really good support for the motor. So anyway, now that the motor is positioned with most of the weight of the motor, well, all the weight of the motor obviously, on the jack, I'm going to put the lighter transmission on it and kind of hang the transmission off of the motor. So the motor I'm going to strap down to this lift, and then my theory, or my hope, is that I'll be able to get this whole massive assembly wheeled under the car and then lifted back up in without too much pain and suffering. This has never gone that smoothly, so I anticipate lots of pain and suffering. But anyway, we'll give it a try and see if the $89 investment saves the world. And I guess we'll go from there. So I'll be back as soon as I get this all strapped up and assembled. Alrighty then, so as you can see, this little motorcycle lift actually works really well. I've got the motor strapped with one of these cargo straps, the ratcheting kind this time, that actually holds the motor very securely to it, and the weight is almost balanced perfectly with the transmission just kind of hanging off here into space. So it rolls very easily, and that's nice. And then, as I was saying with the weight, just lifting up just a tiny bit, this whole thing just kind of so it really is balanced quite well on that. So I'm able to get it up nice and high, and it goes down low enough that I should be able to get the motor and the transmission underneath the car with it just up on the jack stands like it is. So anyway, as you can see, there's some shiny black, hammered blackness going on here. I just went through and painted several of the areas that were kind of showing some rust and so forth, just because I figured, all the motor mounts. And so I also repainted the front motor mount and the motor tail shaft of the motor side mount, and yeah, so anyway, we're making progress, leaps and bounds. Of course, it's taking forever. I got the this is the tail shaft motor mount side plate that I made. Just kind of clean that up a bit, and I'm replacing all of the bolts with nice shiny new ones so that they'll be matching the silver of the aluminum, as opposed to all rusty and so forth. So anyway, that's where we're at the moment. I got to get this. Got to wait for the paint to dry at the moment, and then I'll get this thing back in, and we'll see how this lift system actually works in practice underneath the car. So that should be pretty exciting. Okay, so we're about to put the motor and transmission back in the car, and I just wanted to kind of go over what the engine compartment looks like at the moment, sans transmission and motor. Since this is the first time the transmission's actually been out of this car since I bought it, I figured it was a good opportunity to kind of take a quick peek under here and just to see what the battery box looks like from the bottom, and how all the wiring and so forth is routed, and so on. So anyway, we're gonna put a big old motor right in here in a minute, but I figured I would take a quick pan around just to kind of show you what it looks like. So anyway, here we go, or here goes nothing, as it were. So as you can see, the clearance is really tight here. And so I've got the motor jacked up just a hair off the floor, and so it can kind of tilt here a little bit. But when you tilt it back, you've got enough clearance to just slide her right on in there. Just pretty freaking awesome. You just don't know how much pain and suffering was involved in previous attempts to do this. And so now I'm going to get it jacked up there, and see if we can line up some mounting bracket holes. And I'll be right back. Ah, the best laid plans of mice and men. So, as you can see, we are, I don't know, about an inch too low, give or take. And we are at the exact height that this thing, or the highest height that this particular jack will go. So, it's beautiful, it goes in there quite nicely, but it's not quite tall enough for this setup. So what I'm going to have to do is actually lower the jack stands by a few notches, and then I'll have enough height to do that. So, so close, and yet so far. Be right back after we play with jack stands. Yay! Well, as it turned out, I ended up needing to jack up the transmission side just a hair to kind of level things out perfectly, but I just used the regular floor jack to goose it just a hair, about an inch. But overall, this has been the easiest motor installation from underneath the car that I've ever done. So it worked out really well, and as you can see, we have the motor plate installed, and we are supported on this side, as well as we have the bolt back in on this side, so we're supported there too. So really, it's remarkably easy compared to other attempts that I've had at doing this. And I'm going to do the front motor mount now and get that back motor mount set up. But really, we're pretty much there as far as the installation. That's all the hard part, and the heavy lifting is kind of done. Now I've got to reach around and hook up all the cables and the hoses, or not the hoses, but the shift cables and the speedometer cable, or speedometer cord, and the brake light wheel, the clutch, and all that fun stuff. So anyway, I'm going to get that taken care of, and I'll be back with an update in a bit. Amazingly, everything is back together other than the drive shafts. I was able to get all the wiring done, of course. That was no big deal for the electric motor and the RPM sensor, as well as, of course, the temperature sensor. I did sand. I used a little sanding block to clean off the high voltage contacts before I reconnected those two leads, so they're as fresh and clean as they can be. All the other bolts are in. Front motor mount is back in, and all the wiring has been zip tied and kind of secured up out of the way, so nothing's rubbing on anything. That's the big thing. So now pretty much we're down to putting in the drive shafts, filling the transmission with oil. I use the Pennzoil Synchro Mesh stuff, and yeah, so that's about it. I know that the drive shafts are always a pain in the neck. I'm just trying to get them positioned. I was able to find an undamaged boot drive shaft in my shed, again from some former project. So anyway, I'm going to get that all installed, and we'll be right back. Well, after many hours and an unbelievable amount of effort, swearing, and so forth, I was able to get this assembly all put back together. The drive shafts are in, and I even have the tires on. I haven't tightened down the lug nuts yet. Once I get down on the ground, I can finish tightening them. But anyway, so the big thing is I had to fill in the oil. So the way this works, as you can kind of see, I'm not sure if the camera will pick it up or not, but basically that is the oil fill hole, and you keep putting in the oil until it gets to that line and starts drizzling out, and then you're full. So that's where we're at. It took exactly 2 quarts of Pennzoil Synchro Mesh, and that would be this stuff here, which says it's for manual transmission fluid. So it's basically a very low weight oil, and just kind of works. So anyway, I'm going to put the special little cap back in here, and now we're all set. Yay! Kind of clean up my drizzle. But so yeah, this was a really tricky thing. I wouldn't recommend this to anyone in the world. Basically, I think when you go to the shop, they have a special tool that compresses the springs on the strut in order to make it so you can actually get it lined up with the hub for the wheel. And I didn't have a special tool. So that made things really, really, really hard. But anyway, I got it done, and everything is back together. Both drive shafts are in. And it's all well and good. Everything's all hooked back up. So literally we're at the point where I just need to lower the car down off the jack stands and tighten up those lug nuts on the tires the rest of the way, and then go for a drive. So now it's for the fun part. All the pain and suffering hopefully is over, assuming any of this actually works, and then we'll go have some fun. So yay! Be back in a bit. Okay, after many very long days of being dirty and fighting with the car every step of the way, the EV is back together. It took actually about 3.5 days, pretty much non-stop labor, at least as much energy as I had to give it, and but we now have a new transmission and a new clutch, and everything else has been taken apart, shined up a bit, and put back together. So, what we're going to do is go for our very first test drive. It's 10 o'clock at night, and to document the occasion, we're going to use my Soliton EV display and data logger program. So I'm going to go ahead and start logging now, even though the Soliton is not on yet. And then I'm going to turn on the Soliton. And there it goes. And we can log all that fun stuff. And just for fun, let's take a look at what our current settings are. Which is as shown. So one of the changes that I did make was did the math properly, and 170 times 500 is apparently 85 kilowatts as opposed to whatever I had it set to before. So theoretically that's the limit that I should be hitting with these relatively modest settings. So anyway, here we go. I'm going to turn out the cabin light and turn on the outside lights. Put it into gear. I guess we'll go into second here and see what happens. Oh, there we go. We're back again. Sorry about that. I had a little, I sighted a squirrel off in the distance and wanted to make sure that I wasn't going to run him over with the car. Anyway, so we're in second gear. I'm going to roll on out of here. Nice and gentle like, so we don't squash the squirrel. We are off and running in second gear. Seems to be working reasonably well. It's a little bit dark, so it's hard to see anything really, but it's still a good test. First time this car has been driven since about Tuesday this week. It's now Friday. So yeah, so far so good in second gear. Go for broke here and see how fast we can get her up to. shifting and so forth. Oh, look at that. I can shift while moving. What a novel concept. Just in time to get to the red light and have to stop anyway. But we're going to leave it in third. And just go ahead and accelerate off from dead stop in third. And see how we do. Oh, a little bit pokey. A little bit pokey. Those settings, 500 amp maximum on the Soliton. Kind of feeling it. Might get a little noisy with the wind in the car, but it's a warm summer's evening and I'd really rather not roll up the windows just for some better video. Try to shift. Yeah, there we go. So the clutch does work. That's a beautiful thing. The transmission also seems to work. We're now in fourth gear. Really need to clean this windshield. All the dust and stuff from being in the garage really shows up, particularly at night. Alright, so we're going to leave this in fourth gear while we accelerate onto the on-ramp. Again, 500 amps is pretty weak. Oh, got some tire squeal there. There we go. Yep, that's a little bit pokey, but that's okay. That's what we expect with these settings. Fear. Just down off the jack stands and we're headed on the highway. Taking a corner at 70 miles an hour. How's that for confidence in my workmanship? Trying for fifth gear. Look at that. No grinding. It just shifted like a champ. Awesome. So good. Car's still running. We haven't blown up or nothing. Fifth gear, 2,000 RPMs. Accelerate a bit going up this hill. So we're we're in 5th gear, the controller is limited to 500, yet we're accelerating, going uphill at 80 miles an hour. I think that's still pretty impressive. So it looks like we're pretty much pedal to the floor, topping out about 85. Alright, 86, 87, 88 miles an hour! Yay! Backing off a little bit because we're coming up to my exit, but yeah, anyway, that's not too bad. I'll be curious to analyze the logs to find out what limit we were actually hitting, whether it was the total motor power, which is what I suspect we were hitting at the 85 kilowatt. So yeah, anyway, that'll be kind of fun. So we're going to go ahead and turn around and go back on the highway again. But this seems to be a good, successful first test of the EV with the new transmission, the new clutch, and technically a new drive shaft as well. And some fun tire squeal all the way down the hill, or down the corner. So anyway, that's it for tonight. I will catch up with y'all later. And back from our little 20-minute excursion. So we'll go ahead and turn off the data logger at this time and call it good. So anyway, that is the first test of the newly re-put together Daytona EV. One thing that I did notice during the test drive was that the steering wheel was canted about like so, and that all that tire squeal we were getting going around the corners means that I threw the front end alignment out. Yeah, that's okay. I will adjust that. It was probably when I was reaming on the tie rods during this whole process. It may have had something to do with it, but I'll get those adjusted probably tomorrow when I have a little more energy, and we shall go from there. Anyway, that's it for this extremely long episode. Have a wonderful evening, and I will catch up with you all later.